were talking yesterday, and I was very excited to be in this panel. This is great, and I was like, I just one question: what is digital transformation? I don't know what I've actually signed up to talk about. They still let me come in and talk, so I don't. You can read into that however you want. But the first thing I asked was like, is this the same thing as disruption? Does this get thrown around the same way? And they were like, absolutely. And so in the startup space, that's kind of the hot buzzword that we throw around is like going in and disrupting industries, disrupting what have you. And I think interestingly, I think we arrived at kind of a similar place. Or like to me, if you're really having this kind of digital change, if you're really disruptive, for me, it means you're changing people's jobs. Like you're not just kind of like giving them something that's cool. You're not just like developing some technology. You're not even just like demonstrating that you can do some like proof of concept, do some computation faster. You actually have to like get the human factor interface dialed in on the product so that you're actually changing the way that at least one person in these organizations you're selling into, how they do their job, right? Either you're giving them a new skill, you're letting them do something faster, you're letting a team focus on something else, something that used to be error prone, now is set it and forget it. Whatever it is, you have to not just have like your technology buzzwords, you need to really intimately understand how your product is affecting your end user, and you need to like be obsessed with that person's job and actually like change that at that level, and then you'll actually have a digital transformation. Prior to that, you'll just have something that's really cool to talk about over beers, and that has its own value, but for the product's sake, I think you gotta change someone's job.
The topic of this, sorry if anybody's offended, but I'm going to say it instead of all the punctuation marks. Digital transformation is bullshit. I actually wrote to them and I was like, well, what if I don't agree with the topic of the talk? And they were like, it's okay, people just really like a controversial title, so you can come. And spending time actually thinking about it,
this is true.
I genuinely do think it is bullshit. I think that digital transformation is a fancy word that makes executives feel better about writing a check for something they should have done a long time ago. I think digital has come up slowly in different pockets, and at some point in an organization, especially having worked for Fortune whatever companies, digital happens in little pockets, and at some point they realize that the importance of digital has grown to the point where the digital pockets start touching each other and they're not working together, and they're creating more problems than they're solving. And instead of actually looking at how to fix the problem from a systemic perspective, they just run around with their heads cut off, like, how do we fund this? And then this IT group over here is like, but the infrastructure is too rigid and it would cost too much. And they're like, oh, I can't write a check for that. Let's bring in a digital transformation consultant and we'll just point our fingers at that person if it doesn't work. And actually, they just don't listen to them. But digital transformation is, I was talking with some members of our team a few months ago. I think it's more, it's digital natural selection. You have to evolve. You have to see what's happening with your customers. You have to see what's happening with technology, and you have to keep up or you will die. And to go and slap a fancy word on it, like this is the new CrossFit, or this is the new keto diet, or whatever it is that you're trying to do to keep your body healthier. It's the same with an organization. You can't just go and do a crash diet and think you're transforming yourself. You actually have to change your lifestyle. And true digital transformation is changing the lifestyle of your business, both from a technology standpoint, from a business practices standpoint, and most importantly, from a front-end user experience standpoint, customer experience standpoint.
We need to really understand what our customers are looking for. And in order to do that, we can't just ask our customers, right? It's not the customer's job to solve their own problems. It's our job. And so that's what I really think the crux of digital transformation is really understanding the changing needs of our customer before they even know the needs themselves.
If you can find something that you think kind of really captures the culture or the specific problem that you're working on, distill that down and do something with it, I think you can move much faster. So when I was working for the Hubble Space Telescope, one of my first assignments, they gave me 6 sheets of paper, and they were like, these are the instructions you need to follow every day to make sure that the telescope is correctly calibrated. And it was like, open this file, look at it. Does it look like this file? Copy it over here. Open a spreadsheet. Just kidding, it's not a spreadsheet, it's CSV. Add a new row. Write that image, write the file name of that image. Write OK next to it. Close that. Open. It was like 6 pages of this, and I was like, no. came in over the weekend, and like I wrote some, like I Googled, my way, we all joke we Google our way through our jobs. I Googled my way through that job, like made a script and came back the next day, and I was on Monday, and I was like, hey, I wrote a script that does all that, and like right away they were like, can you also make it do this thing? And like all of a sudden we became like a mini engineering group. Like that's all it took, is like I just showed them the value, and there was like the culture like followed, right? Like you were saying, the process changed, and like to this day, like that is still how that group operates. Like we made a little embedded engineering team. People have gone on from that team to go into the engineering industry in lots of like leadership roles, but like it just started with, instead of sitting around and having a discussion of like, well, should we do engineering projects? Like, is that what our job really is? I just like took a few hours, built something, and they were like, cool. Like that's what we do now. We see the value.
The real key is empathy. And I've never actually hired anyone who didn't use that word in an interview. If you don't know how to empathize with someone else and ask the questions necessary to get to those answers, then you're not really going to achieve an understanding of what customers want.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points I want to talk on. One is absolutely the empathy, and the way that you phrase the questions that you ask. Open-ended questions are the best, and not leading questions. And that sounds really obvious, but when you watch customer interviews, I mean, we can't go in unbiased. Everyone has biases, and you probably have a solution in your head. Everyone has those great ideas of, yeah, I want to implement this solution, so let's see if the customer wants it. That's going to come out. So that's one thing to kind of keep an eye out for when you're asking those questions.
The question I found to be most helpful, I mean, it's a good one, I think, to remind yourself of as the person who's trying to get to know your customer, is just what problem are you trying to solve? And that seems like a really deceptively easy thing, but like I often lose myself in like, hey, I'm going to be empathetic, and like, okay, so you want to take this file, you want to move it over here, you want to do that, okay, but then you run a problem with this file, and like, oh, I have an engineering solution for that, it's great. But if I ask like, wait, what problem are you actually trying to solve? And like, oh, I just want to make sure that I still have this like certification. And I was like, oh, what if I told you if you've passed the security requirements? They're like, oh yeah, just do that, and I don't care about the files. Like, I actually don't want to deal with that. I'm like, oh, yeah, I was going to solve the wrong problem. The thing we talk about in product management, product development, product discovery is it's not about getting the right answer. It's about getting as many attempts at answering it as you can, right? So like you're going to be wrong, I don't know, like 99% of the time, which would make you like probably 10x more effective than I am. And so just try to get those little attempts as fast as you can. Think about like the problem you're really stuck on, and like think about like what you can do. This is a challenge I try to like do with myself. What can I do to fix this problem in an hour? Right? Like go from like, not like, okay, if I had like an engineering team, and even scale down from like, if I had the weekend to like learn this new software package, get down to like, if I really like an hour, like how could I convince something that there is some value here, right? And if that doesn't stick, then like maybe try go on to the next idea, right? Unless you think you like totally bungled that. But if you could find like, 1 hour a week, maybe end of the day when you're not ready to take the train home yet, but you're done with work, like fiddle with something. Like no manager in their right mind is going to get upset that you're doing this. And like every week you have a little prototype, like a little thing. And if you find like the right fit, like I feel like someone's going to want to pick that up and be like, cool, like could you take half a day and like flesh that out? Like try to put some real data in that. And then when you find the right fit, that should like cascade up, right? And if it hasn't, maybe you just need to run more little experiments.
I think that we get these ideas instilled in us that you have to stay at that first company for X amount of time, and you have to stay at every other company for a certain amount of time. And I don't think that that's true anymore. I think especially when you are looking for something, you need to know what you really, not what you want to do, but really what your values are and what you want to try and learn. And if you're not getting that at your company, and I mean, we're talking about digital transformation, right? If your company doesn't have that culture that you're looking for, that culture change isn't gonna come tomorrow. So you kind of have to, know for yourself and be willing to make that change. And I have found, I've only had like 1 or 2 people that have told me, your resume looks kind of bouncy. And I'm like, yeah, but you know what? I have a story for each and every one of those positions, and I can tell you what I learned there, and I can tell you what I wasn't learning and why I decided to make a change. And I think, at least in my experience, being able to tell that story and to speak to the, the integrity and the values that you have for yourself and really show the desire to learn and grow and be able to articulate that, I think that's more important than longevity at, any company.
Yeah, I think it's tricky, but I think it's important to have these conversations very explicitly before you start a project of like, what does success look like? What are we defining as our success criteria? And obviously that's going to depend on the project you're working on, but I think breaking that down a little bit and discussing about like, okay, is this actually valuable? Like is that 5% increase in whatever, like, is that actually valuable to us? And is it actually feasible? Can we actually do that? Is that low-hanging fruit? Or are we squeezing blood from a stone? And a question I always really like to ask to add texture to that conversation, and I think this is especially important if you're designing an engineering system, is to ask, what does failure look like? And clearly define like this, and sometimes that can help break the ice in the conversation. Like we're having a very long conversation in my role right now about basically whether to draw a trend line on a graph, essentially. And people are worried that it will scare the customers if we draw that trend line, because if they're not on the trend, maybe they'll get upset, and like maybe they'll decide that they don't want to renew. And I think an important part of that conversation is to get that clear, but then also you can ask the questions like, well, if we lose like 3% of our customers and they're actually like not on this trend line, maybe they're just not great customers, and like the other 97%, maybe we'll have a real better experience than if we get a bump from everyone else because now they know that there's a goal for them to shoot for. Is that okay? And like having those two things you can ping pong back and forth, I think helps add texture to that conversation.
On top of that quantitative data, you can also do qual data and asking customers directly about how their perception, their relationship with your brand has changed after you implement an initiative. That's simply doing shop-alongs or surveys or actually implementing some user research after implementing change to see about how well your hypothesis is performing. A lack of proper desire for success from the get-go. I think it kind of goes back to the reason why any initiative, any organization starts down the path of digital transformation. Is it the result of panic and feelings of fear and obligation? Then you're starting to walk down a path you'd never wanted to walk down to begin with. You're going to find every excuse possible to go back to what you know is normal.
So I've a little less experience in this area than my colleagues here, but I will share an anecdote that I think sheds some light on this. I think what people are missing is like what the last gentleman was asking about, like this clear criteria for success and failure. I'd actually be curious to see how people define when they talk about digital transformation succeeding or failing, like how they define that, because in our company, one of my first projects I took on is we built a data warehouse, right? So we have all these data silos throughout the company, and we engaged with several consultants and 5 or 6 different cloud vendors to build this whole cloud architecture that pulled in all this data in one place. And so when we started this project, we went to all our stakeholders in the company. We asked them, like, okay, like, what do you guys want to do data-wise? Like, what would be useful? Like, what are your problems? What are you trying to solve? Collected all that. Like, I talked to, like, I must have driven all my friends crazy in the tech world because I asked them all these questions about, like, strategy and all these different vendors and, like, how would you approach this problem, and figured out what we want to do. And then we talked to the vendors, and, I was pretty stringent with them of, like, hey, I'm trying to do exactly this thing. Like, prove that you can do this. And then, at the end, we spent a butt ton of money, and it was well spent. And I met with one of the most expensive vendor, and they came on, and they're like, great, so this is like your onboarding process. So we'd like to help you figure out what it is you want to do with our product. So can you think of any stakeholders in your company that might want to use this? And I was like, what? And it occurred to me that most of the people they engage with, like, operate on that level. They're like, this is cool, and then they buy it, and then they try to reverse in, like, how to use this. They were, like, blown away that I was like, well, I know who my user stakeholders are. Like, these are the design criteria I have. And they're like, oh, well, let's, like, make a first dashboard. I was like, no, that's what we did during our like during our trial period. Like we already made the dashboard, like that was our like first deliverable. And they're like, whoa, like you thought of all that? And I was like, what the hell is everyone else doing? Are you just like giving people money and being like, I wonder how we can use this? I think they are.
Yeah, they are.